People who have been following Crowdsource the Truth are aware that Harmon Wilfred is America's first refugee, and he and his wife Carolyn have been separated for several years. Harmon hasn't seen his children in almost 20 years, and Harmon's wife Carolyn has been facing a shareholder oppression civil suit from her family that own the Dare Food Corporation in Canada. And we've been getting weekly updates on that matter. Carolyn, has there been any news with regard to that shareholder oppression case?
Unfortunately not. So they certainly are taking their time, and as people say, God's always on time, but I sure wish he'd hurry up.
Well, I'm for one a little surprised that we haven't heard anything about it yet. I sort of presumed it would happen very quickly, but I think we see that people who understand the legal system and the courts and who may have nefarious purposes seem adept at manipulating those systems, whether it's paying people off or, well, let me not speculate. We have no idea why it's being delayed.
No.
Hopefully it is because it is being very carefully considered by nothing but honest people who will ultimately come to a favorable and just decision. And we await that.
It does set a precedent when I win. So I think they're being very careful with how they put it together.
Why does it set a precedent?
This is about family holding companies that hold operating companies, and as our friend King James has said, there's about 25 really wealthy families in Canada who are really watching this very carefully, because what families do is they set up family holding companies. They put certain family members in the holding company, and then they only put specific favored family members in the actual operating company. So the holding company members can get squeezed, can get oppressed, can get mistreated, and there's not a whole lot they can do about it. Well, in effect, the general legal argument is these holding companies are inherently oppressive by the way they're written. Families are literally using these holding companies as corporate structures in order to oppress their family members, or control their family members, and that really wasn't what these corporate structures were originally designed to do. So they're being misused. So we're hoping that the court will recognize that will set a precedent. They'll bring a decision that will finally announce that these things are oppressive, and then you've got about 25 families with a lot of people in holding companies that may come forward and jump into the legal system and start quite a flap in the legal system.
And we've got King James. Sorry, Carolyn.
Sorry, because I'm a minority shareholder and also a girl, I have to say, not being involved in the business. My brothers, I would consider corporate bullies. They tell me just a tiny little bit. They give me just a tiny little bit of money while they live very, very well. And they're in control of everything in the company. I have no say whatsoever.
Well, we've got King James in the YouTube comments confirming that this is a big case and they want to get it right. So that's good input. And Carolyn, we're having a lot of experience with bullies, people who like to manipulate structures and manipulate positions of power, or get themselves into a position where they can manipulate the legal system to bully other people. They are not confident in themselves or their positions to face other people on even ground, face to face. Because as I've gotten to know you and your husband over Skype over the past couple of weeks, I find you to be two people of exceptional integrity and, in my view, honesty, and two people that have worked very, very hard to do the right thing. And I think we know that bullies and losers don't like to meet people on even ground. They like to cheat, they like to lie, they like to murder, and do whatever they can to get ahead. Harmon, you've got explosive details for us again this week. It's important that we remind people that the things that you're discussing here on America's First Refugee, a program exclusive to Crowdsource the Truth, this is material that has never come forward in any forum before. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I've been reluctant, frankly, to bring this information out. As you know, from the beginning, I have said there were certain things that I would not share on the program that I really wanted to share directly with President Trump or someone that he trusts. And nowadays, it's hard to know who President Trump trusts because he's so surrounded by the shadow government. I don't even think he knows, quite frankly. But since President Trump has not come forward, and it's just been long enough, I suppose you could say I've had enough. And so I'm ready to put all this on the table and even offer a bit of a history lesson today. This is going to be is it explosive? I'll let the audience decide whether or not it's explosive. But it's definitely something new, and it's definitely something that will bend your mind a bit, for sure.
Right. Now, before we get into
history lesson, it's a history lesson as well as an Indiana Jones story.
Exactly.
Stranger than fiction, I suppose you could say.
Stranger than fiction.
Right. And before we get into...
But true.
Strange but true. So many of the best stories are. Before we get too into the details of your ordeal today, I wanted to bring a few things to everyone's attention. Art Voice has been doing a series on the Wilfreds and on this program, America's First Refugee. You can go to artvoice.com and you can see this latest article, which is asking, is Harmon Wilfred another Edward Snowden? And that's a good question. Harmon is certainly a whistleblower. This article came out just yesterday, and we definitely want to thank Art Voice for bringing some more attention to this matter. People who want to follow Harmon closely can follow him on Twitter. He is just at Harmon Tweets, and his Twitter account is loaded up with information and articles that are coming out. There was a great article, Art Voice has republished this article that was originally, what was the publication that originally had this, Harmon?
That would have been the Christchurch Press, which is a Fairfax group. They've been the ones over the past 10 years that have really been unfair to me. They've gone into my website, they've published things that were parts and pieces and completely out of context, trying to make me look bad, and frankly trying to get me thrown out of the country. And in the end, when they finally figured out that they couldn't make me look bad because I wasn't bad, and they couldn't even get me thrown out of the country, and they even found themselves embarrassing the government over that. Now it seems that there's a new person on the block, a fellow, and I'm going to mention his name if you don't mind, named Oliver Lewis, and Oliver seems to be doing a pretty good job of becoming objective on the storyline. So we're opening our minds a little bit, scratching our heads and wondering whether or not we should give him a little more room. I actually refused to be interviewed by him, knowing how poorly they treated me in the past. But now I think he's trying to show me his good side. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, he did a pretty good article, pretty objective article.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, and we are certainly open to Oliver Lewis if he's going to be reporting in a factual and unbiased way. It's a crazy story, and just to catch people up, this photo was taken some time ago. Harmon and Carolyn have been separated for more than 2.5 years, and that is not by choice. They have been involuntarily forced to be apart. Harmon is there in New Zealand, where he has been left with no choice but to relinquish his U.S. citizenship. He has not been granted New Zealand citizenship, and he is a man without a nation. This is presenting a number of legal and practical problems. He's unable to work. He's unable to obtain a passport. Carolyn, of course, has been blocked from entering the country of New Zealand, despite the fact that she's a Canadian citizen, and immigration treaties between the two countries should allow for unfettered travel between them. And it's really been an ongoing problem. Harmon has detailed the various members of the U.S. government, and including John Souther, who is now the mayor of Colorado Springs. We've spoken, of course, about the harsh treatment and lack of response that Harmon has received from Michael Horowitz. Now, Harmon, again, I don't want to divert, but Michael Horowitz has just released his OIG report on Friday.
What? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yes, and it's got some really damning criticism, some harsh indictments of the corruption within the FBI, and it's raised the question in my mind, Harmon, because there's a little bit of a flap that came up when Mr. Horowitz was first presented to us. Of course, Dr. Stephen, who affiliates with the White Hats, White Hat Report, and we've had Paladin on a number of times. Dr. Stephen is an expert in Office of Inspector General procedure, and he gave us a comprehensive overview of evidence that he had found, which led him to the conclusion that Mr. Horowitz would be draining the swamp. Now, immediately that resulted in people emailing me videos from a resource that we have determined to be almost purely lacking of factual information. That is American intelligence media. I have seen a tremendous amount of evidence to indicate that this is a disinformation operation, has blatantly spread lies about myself and other things. Also, many people have heard that ridiculous phone call that I had with Douglas Gabriel of American Intelligence Media, but he had put forth a video saying that Horowitz was a swamp creature. And this is what caused me to initially engage with American intelligence media, because the whole purpose of Crowdsource the Truth is to deal with people who have firsthand experience, who are witnesses to things, who are experts in things, who can give us factual information according to their point of view. Now, Harmon, as I've said, I find you to be an exceedingly honest and forthright person compared to almost everyone that I've met. I don't see, even setting aside my personal assessment of you, I don't see any obvious reason why someone would make up a story like this. There's obviously documentation in third-party publications, some of which don't even like you, are corroborating your story. So I think there are a lot of reasons to believe that what you are saying is truthful and factual, and that you're being honest with us. So the thing that comes to mind is it possible that everyone here is right, but something else is going on? Could Michael Horowitz have been in a position when he was dealing with you, Harmon, that could have caused him to be forced to respond in the way that he did? And is it possible that he is now out from under the thumb of whoever may have been forcing him to mistreat you, and he knows that that was the wrong thing to do, and maybe he will, in fact, drain the swamp?
Well, and as I've said before, I'm very open to that. I don't hold a grudge. I just want to see people get it right. And so if that's where he's coming from, fine, come forward. Take a look at the documentation and evidence that I've got. Make some judgments about that. Discuss it with me. It seems that if he's willing to do that, and he, as you've indicated, if he's already started coming out with things that seem to be the truth, and at least a beginning of draining the swamp, then bully for him. I'm all for it. I congratulate him for that.
Good. Yes, as I think any reasonable person would feel. And, again, when people are, just doggedly locked to their beliefs and refuse to allow new information to change their mind, that's not really ideal. I mean, I am certainly open to any number of possibilities related to any number of things. I just really like to see evidence. I don't like people who tell me to just take their word for things. And it's one of the reasons why I really appreciate what you've been doing, Harmon, is that much like our mutual friend Charles Ortel, everything you say is just documented in tons and tons of evidence. So why don't we get into some of that evidence today And sorry, not to keep interrupting or delaying, but people who want to follow along can go to luminadium.com, which is a website that Harmon has dedicated to his evidence. And if you have difficulty remembering that name or finding that website, you can of course go to harmonwilfred.com, which is Harmon's personal page, and you can just click on this "Let There Be Light" link right here. That brings you to Luminadium, and Harmon has very skillfully laid out all of the tremendous evidence in this pretty impressive web interface, and you can jump to various elements of the document that he's going to be sharing with us today. Harmon, thank you for putting together this comprehensive outline, and we'll be discussing today on April 17th. Actually, that's the New Zealand date. Here in New York, it's still April 16th. But we're going to talk about this coincidence versus the preponderance of evidence as Harmon takes on China, the Clintons' collaborator.
Well, and as I say, coincidence versus preponderance of evidence, sometimes you have to consider that much of evidence that comes together, especially with these kind of folks that are dealing with the high-level politicians and so on, they're pretty good at hiding things.
Yes.
And so when you're that good at hiding things, you look for patterns of behavior. You look for patterns of evidence. You look for what I call the preponderance of evidence, where one piece of evidence in one particular situation might not be enough to have to make a conclusion. But when you see a pattern that goes on in some cases, like in my case, for years, then I think you've got something to say, and the courts even back that up. So part 3, I'm calling this, of this interview series is really, it advances the Clinton CIA influence through the highest Asian government and financial circles to the global monetary power brokers. And when I say power brokers, I'm not kidding, and I have direct experience in this, of the Rothschilds banking empire. I'll start out by saying that only because my experience with these guys stretched my belief of what could happen and what was possible. So I'll just give you a little background here just as we advance into today's subject matter. By 1998, the CIA had reportedly gained control of at least 11 out of 34 Mitsubishi bank certificates of commercial obligation, and we call those banknotes.
Now,
Originally
Harmon,
issued.
where did that reporting come from? You say reportedly. How do we know that?
Well, in working with the Rothschild family, when they first brought me the first Mitsubishi banknote, and they asked me if it could be transacted privately, and of course, with my contacts with some private trusts, I said, well, sure, I'll give it a go. It wasn't long after that I actually presented one of these banknotes, and I'll go through some of this in the narrative that we've got. I actually presented the banknote to a member of the Rothschild family, who came back to me with copies of the balance of the Mitsubishi banknotes that they apparently in the late 1960s were involved in causing the issue of through the Mitsubishi Bank. So I was shown copies of a total of 34. I was told that the CIA were involved in up to 11 of them at that point, that they had assigned to them, and that's what they were trying to get done. In the past, the CIA, I was told again, had tried to transact these notes privately. They'd actually used some of these notes, in fact, the first one especially, when we were checking out the note and confirming it, we found that Mr. Oliver North and the Iran-contra arms deals, he'd been using some coupons off these notes, which were the interest coupons. But nobody had ever actually been able to access the principal amounts. They weren't originally designed to be accessed, but they asked me if it could be done. So that was
Harmon,
my job.
Would you be surprised if you found out that someone who had been captured by the Sandinistas, according to his own testimony, was providing significant interference to the operation of Crowdsource the Truth? Would you see any potential for a connection between the evidence that you're revealing and someone with that background trying to stop us from bringing out your evidence?
I think your statement itself goes to evidence. Again, is that a coincidence?
I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a, what do you call that? A leading question?
I'm not
Tell you what,
aware of any U.S. military interaction in Nicaragua with the Sandinistas that was not directly related to Iran-Contra.
yes, yes, yes. Well, yeah. Um, Again, these notes were originally issued to Central American countries in the late 60s. And again, I found out later on that these were actually issued through the Rothschild family, with the first note converted from literally from six to 15 billion in U.S. Treasury bills uh, in early 2001. The Clinton CIA, and I'm going to call it cash because that seems to go around a lot, funded covert laundering operation had begun. And again, unwittingly, I didn't realize that that's what I was helping put together. I was told that I was going to be dealing with humanitarian projects that needed to be funded in Central America. Apparently, Guatemala had gone through a rather devastating uh, hurricane event just years before that, and they were still trying to recover from that. So I was literally traveling to Florida with visiting one of the trusts that I'd gotten involved in this, looking at projects that were put together by different mayors of different cities in Guatemala, and even working through the Catholic Church through the Vatican, where they actually sent up the Archbishop of Guatemala and one of his representatives to try to sort of coordinate the projects. So, I mean, if it was a scam, it was a darn well put together one.
Right.
But in any
And
case, what I found out was certainly what.
You talk about the preponderance of evidence. There's another legal term called pattern and practice. And of course,
Yes, okay.
doing
Yes.
scams on these sort of less sophisticated, less developed countries that have experienced natural disasters seems to fit the pattern and practice of the Clintons based on what we know now.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, at that time, it was, now here's where the subject matter comes in for today. It was also reported to the Securities and Exchange Commission that the Bank of the Republic of China. Now, we've not discussed this before, and as I've said before, I've not really brought out any of this information before, but this is also on my website. The Bank of the Republic of China was involved in the authentication of this Mitsubishi transaction. Um, Now let's go on with sort of again a bit of a recap of where I've been with this story, and then I'll move right into the the Indiana Jones version, I suppose you could call it. Just to recap my story up to the point of the covert Clinton CIA transacting of the first Mitsubishi note. The reader, the audience may recall, if you've been listening to these previous videos, that I had advanced through a number of personal challenges from 1990 through 1996. And then you can see that in the April 3rd interview outline on my website. In 1990, I filed a lawsuit against the Colorado family court system. And this is just my, how can I say this? This is just my whistleblowing career, if you want to call it that. God knows I didn't design it that way, but it came up that way. But lawsuit against the Colorado family court system for violation of my civil rights, which took away my son at that point in time and took away all my rights as a father. In 1991, I filed a $30 billion U.S. taxpayer class action suit against the Resolution Trust Corporation. Again, very briefly, 1994 to 1996, I prompted an FBI probe of the El Paso County, and that's in Colorado, pension fund embezzlement scheme, because I was also providing services through the pension fund, and I discovered this, that exposed the county district attorney in a cover-up that prompted the conviction of the pension fund administrator and the fining and dismissal of various county officials. In 1996, again, a little background, having made enemies of the good old boys in Colorado, I moved on as an international real estate and financial intermediary. In June 1996, I was contracted by the CIA as an asset to assist in setting up this private trust system to transact the Mitsubishi notes we were just speaking of. Simultaneous and totally coincidental with this assignment, I was introduced to what I discovered later was an influential head of the Rothschild family who happened to have a private trust in Liechtenstein. As my mandate with the CIA was to locate one or more private global trusts who would cooperate in setting up a system to covertly transact these, quote, notes, I introduced the Mitsubishi deal to the Rothschild family trust, as well as the privately owned another trust that I was aware of, Bay State Trust, also headquartered in Liechtenstein. I met with the heads of these trusts in Zurich, Switzerland, and put together a joint venture that unfortunately resulted in the conversion of the first note on behalf of the Clinton CIA funding cartel. Again, I didn't know that that's where it was going. I thought it was about humanitarian funding for Central America. In July 1997, in the process of this covert transaction, I was sent to Ontario, Canada on behalf of Bay State Trust, one of the trusts that were involved, to evaluate coal-fired power plant investments in the People's Republic of China. The Chinese investment team included several Canadians and their Chinese-Canadian partners. In August of 1997, I discovered that the CIA had ulterior motives, imagine that, not originally disclosed as humanitarian, but as a black ops covert CIA bank funding operation. I objected and was told to stop asking questions and complete the mission. And you don't argue with these guys, believe me. October 1997, under protest of my CIA handler, I had some personal issues going on that I had to deal with where my children were concerned. I traveled back to my home in Colorado to confront my then wife, Harmon Wilfred's abuse of our children. I promptly filed for divorce, returned to Canada with my children, and completed the CIA mission by year end. February 1998, again advancing, my children taken from me at that time by the U.S. authorities through Canada. I was arrested in Canada and incarcerated in a maximum security prison for extradition. And by the way, as we've talked about in the past videos, when I was arrested, they had no charges. They didn't read me my rights. They put me in a maximum security prison, and it was an underground maximum security prison, which was crazy. This was prompted, and you ask yourself, as my attorney did in Canada, who the hell have you pissed off in the U.S.? Because we're talking family court stuff here. Why would I be set up for extradition, and why would I be met at my door with a couple of guys who were fully armed with flak jackets on and acting like I was some kind of a real bad hombre?
Right.
But this whole thing was prompted by my old Colorado enemy, and you guys who've ever been watching these interviews will recall this. District Attorney John Suthers. Unbeknownst to me, this was in collaboration. Suthers was trying to get me. He saw that the Clintons were trying to get me. This was in collaboration with the Clinton CIA cartel. Apparently, I had become a loose end. Everybody knows what that is from the criminal perspective. To the operation, and I needed to be disposed of. Now, I was pretty afraid, and at that time, Carolyn was involved with me, and we were both concerned that I was going to be killed. In fact, Carolyn was quite worried about that all the time, especially being in prison. Believe me, being in prison is not a place that you're safe. In May 1998, while incarcerated in Canada, my Colorado divorce was finalized ex parte, meaning I couldn't even be there, and they just did anything they wanted to, and they did it completely without me, which also was a violation of my civil rights.
Or any legal representation from you.
Yeah, I didn't even have any legal representation here. They just ran right over me, including the removal of all of my parental rights for my 2 children from that marriage. I was literally told by a judge if I didn't submit myself to a psychiatric institution for at least 1 year, I'd never see my children again, or at least I wouldn't be able to see my first son. And that same judgment was utilized in the second judgment. In July 1998, when Canada approved my extradition, and I think I've told you about the circumstances that surrounded that. It was completely corrupt. I appealed the extradition and was granted a $600,000 bail. The U.S. was so insistent that I be kept in jail and I be extradited over the border, and I knew if that happened, I wasn't sure what my fate would be after that. But with a $600,000 bail that was supported by Carolyn's father, I think reluctantly, but then Carolyn and her mother were pretty persuasive. I was released from incarceration, awaiting what I would call a lengthy appeal period. I think that the appeal period during that time was, gosh, close to 2 years, wasn't it, dear?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Anyway, in August 1998, Carolyn and I were married in Stratford, Ontario.
We got married between jails. We got married between jail sentences, jail terms.
Well, jail terms for sure. I was out of jail. We got married. Then I decided I would go back down to Colorado because I was still on appeal. But in the end, I set the appeal aside because I was really worried about my kids and took a chance and decided to travel back down to Colorado, allow myself to be extradited to see what I could do for my kids. And that turned out to be a nightmare as well. Mm. But from September 1998 to September 1999, while I was still in Canada, Carolyn and I and a couple of other friends commenced a sustained international correspondence and phone campaign on behalf of the safety of my children. October 1999, now we're going to get a little bit more into the Chinese side of things. While continuing to meet with the Canadian/Chinese representatives for project in China, they were still working with us. Even though I was in and out of jail, these guys were very understanding. They wanted to get these deals done, and they knew that I had the capacity to do the deals. So they continued to work with us on the possibility of funding their projects in China. Carolyn and I were called in the middle of all these meetings and things that were going on. We were called to a separate meeting with 2 Chinese members of the delegation. As this and subsequent meetings were deemed highly confidential and remain so today, with all contacts involved, we've decided to call these 2 gentlemen aliases John and Paul.
Now we get into the story.
Yeah. As the meeting proceeded in a quiet corner of the lobby of a Holiday Inn there in Kitchener, Ontario, John revealed that he and Paul were covert agents of a Chinese benefactor. Now that was a bit strange, but we knew these guys pretty well. In fact, we'd really gotten to be quite friendly with them over that sort of year-plus period while I was there and sort of in and out of jail. They helped us a lot. We didn't quite understand why they were going out of their way to help us a lot, but they were. They were quite genuine about it.
Well, we thought that we were just, going to the Holiday Inn to have a casual meeting. We had no idea what they were talking about.
That's right.
And,
but they were quite insistent on meeting with us. Yeah, go ahead, dude.
Yeah. And then they started into telling us this story that was quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, this benefactor that they were supposed to be representing was the trustee that we were told was the trustee of a confidential trust that held all the assets. Now, here's where it starts to get a little crazy. This trust held all the assets of the original Ming Dynasty treasury, having placed under the care of the trust in the mid-1940s, now here comes the history lesson, that I had no idea, by the Chinese nationalist government under its then leader, Chiang Kai-Shek. Although Carolyn and I were highly skeptical, because we had spent a year getting to know John and his family and his associate, we'll call him Paul, during many social and business gatherings, we believed that they were above reproach. Now, here's where we go into what I call the Chinese connection. John explained the reason we were being approached was prompted because of our scheduled meeting with President Clinton's attorney, Gregory Craig. As I've said before, Jason, Gregory Craig, after I got out of jail and was on bail, bailed me out and literally had some freedom. the president and the U.S. Justice Department knew that I was going to start gathering all my documentation and evidence to show that everything that they said about me was wrong, and that they were really afraid that I was going to expose the Clinton CIA Mitsubishi deal. And in fact, when I was picked up in Canada, they actually got some of my documents that were on me, and my ex-wife in Colorado had actually given them some things that were held in my home there. So it was already exposed to a certain degree. John, then one of the guys that were there, that was the Chinese guys, then requested our patience as they asked me personal questions about my background. Now it was beginning to get a little weird. The place and date of my birth, and they also wanted to inspect my driver's license. So I gave it all to them, and Carolyn and I were sitting there again, being very patient. After receiving answers to all their questions, John and Paul became, I guess you could say, dear, excited?
Well, yeah, they were smiling a lot. They were sort of speaking a bit in Chinese. They excused themselves from the table for a brief period of time and went off and had a tete-a-tete between the two of them, and then they came back to the table.
Yeah.
And when they came back to the table, they began to tell us a story that was rather extraordinary. And yeah, if you can just bear with us and listen to this story, you will find that it's the preponderance of the evidence that proves that this story is real, and everything that we are telling you is true. This is the Indiana Jones story.
Well, I hesitate to call it Indiana Jones. That's a bit of a stretch, but I think much of our audience might believe that's probably true.
Yeah, I mean, we've lived this story, and we've known about this story for a long time. We've kept it very quiet for a long time, and now we're bringing it out into the public for many reasons. First of all, because we've been trying to get to President Trump to tell him this story, and he hasn't paid attention to us. So it's like, now it's time, President Trump, to pay attention to us, because this is a very, very important and critical story for you to know about.
And for all the things that he told us at that day, and all the evidence and the circumstances that we've been through, even in the last 20 years, and even some of the recent times, what we've confirmed is that pretty much all of that corroborates much of the amazing tale that they told. And here's the tale, and I'll tell it as best I can. And please help me with this, dear, because you were there with me.
Yeah, try to tell it and not read it so much, but just try to tell it as you remember it and from your heart. And how, I mean, I'll interject what I remember, and yeah.
Well, let me pause here and there, as we're doing now, and be conversational about all this. But I also want to be very thorough about it. And I've got personal notes on this meeting. As I've often told Jason, everything that I do and everything that I did then and all the things I do now, I carry around a notebook, and I've got piles of notebooks that are all undated, and many of my notebooks now are tucked away. When I say tucked away, they're under lock and key, and they're in places where no one can get their hands on them, because the notes that I have are pretty incredible when you think about it. I don't think anybody, including the Clintons, expected me to still be around 20 years later telling this story. I think they all thought they'd gotten rid of me. They completely destroyed my credibility, and they thought they'd handed me over to John Suthers, who was quite the top cop in Colorado, who knew how to dispose of people, and they thought that was an issue that was over, but clearly it's not. Yeah, so I may be somewhat non-specific with this, at least for the time being, with dates and times, but all of these facts can be made available if required, and certainly from my notebooks. Now, we were told that although the public history of the Chiang, and I'm going to call it the Chiang nationalist government, if Chiang Kai-Shek and his family could bear with me, I don't keep wanting to say Chiang Kai-Shek, but of the Chiang nationalist government, reflects the actual history reflects money that was borrowed from the U.S. to support the war effort against Japan in the 1930s and 40s. This was when Japan was attacking China like crazy, and this was before the U.S. got into the war in Asia and, frankly, the war in Europe. And in actual fact, Pearl Harbor was bombed in 1941, and that virtually destroyed the entire U.S. naval arsenal. That's pretty much documented in history. Unfortunately, the U.S. naval arsenal was all there.
Funny thing that all the Navy ships were parked in one spot at one time, which normally you would think that they would be smart enough not to do that, but yeah.
Well, and
that's a good question.
There's lots of conspiracy theories around that, whether they're actually conspiracy theories or true or not. But some say that the U.S. knew exactly what was going to happen, and that was the way that they persuaded, quote unquote, the U.S. to get into the war. But certainly by that time, the U.S. was desperate to build an immediate war machine to repel the Japanese and, frankly, its Axis partners, which at the time, of course, was Germany and Italy. The U.S. historical accounts would expect the world to believe that the funding for this massive armory buildup was quickly provided, because it had to be done very quickly, through U.S. war bonds. Now, keeping in mind that, considering that the U.S. economic conditions at the time, where the U.S. had just come out of the Great Depression, that wouldn't seem very likely that they would have that kind of money, or the U.S. population would produce that kind of money that quickly to literally gear up an entire war machine, airplanes, tanks, ships, everything that was needed, and all of a sudden the U.S. appears on the scene with all of this equipment. Now, that made sense to me, and I'd never heard it put that way before. John and Paul told us that as Chiang's government was desperate for help, I mean desperate, against Japan, and its coveted Ming Dynasty ancient treasury contained what amounted to then untold, and I'm going to say billions, some would say trillions, but I think over the years, with the price of gold and everything else, it's gone up so much, it certainly is trillions by now, but I'll try to be conservative and say untold billions, in gold, jewel, and precious metals. This treasury became, I would think, reluctantly available to obtain help. The U.S. requested, at that time, again being desperate, and obtained immediate shipments of billions of gold bullion, and this is according to John and Paul, from China, in return for U.S. gold bonds for full value. These bonds were in denominations of 10 million each, with 10 bonds contained in each envelope, equaling $100 million packages. Now, to our shock, as we're sitting there listening to this story, and Carol and I are looking at each other, sort of not rolling our eyes and saying, "Oh, okay, carry on." John then
in my family, I'm used to sort of the chat of millions of dollars, but this was really, wow, this is like, really? But anyhow, we continued to listen there, and we were both, all of us were very respectful with each other. So, yeah.
Then it happened. John opened up this briefcase, and he pulled out a gilded envelope. When I say gilded, I was beginning to be impressed from the first moment that this started to occur. Clearly made of a very expensive fabric paper, with U.S. government embossments and watermarks on it that were of a quality that was, wow. I say undeniable, but wow. He then removed several originally signed $10 million bonds from this envelope for us to inspect. He handed them to us. These bonds were of very high quality and appeared, I mean, I've seen these kinds of instruments before, so I wasn't stupid about it. They were very high quality and appeared to have all of the markings of a credible bond one would expect in this category. Again, still remaining skeptical, but these bonds even included what appeared to be, and I mean, back then they weren't quite as good as they are now, so I imagine it's easier to fool people nowadays, but it really had original signatures of the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, and I think that was I don't remember the guy's name now, but anyway.
When I saw these bonds, I was, to me, they were like amazing works of art. They were phenomenal. They were beautiful to look at.
When they
They were
pulled them out,
absolutely
did they
stunning.
say Bonds, James
Oh yeah.
Bonds?
That's right. That's right. Well, and when we started looking at them, and we were off in sort of the corner of this hotel lobby area. We were in sort of a quiet area, and there was reasonable lighting there. So I was literally picking them up and looking at them in the light. They had watermarks in them
Oh,
of presidents. They were embossed.
they
It
were
was,
they were stunning.
as Carolyn says, they were like a work of art.
Yeah. I mean,
These bonds.
for a person to forge something like that would just, I mean, wow.
Well, let me go on because
Yeah, keep going on.
I would expect, and if anybody out there who's listening to this isn't at least highly skeptical, I'd be surprised. And I would encourage you to be skeptical. But hear us out, because this is where we went with this. These bonds were accompanied by the metal printing plates, the original plates, wrapped in silk and stored in a separate gilded box with an original letter of conveyance to the then Chinese national government. And it was all signed, sealed, and had seals in it and so on, the letter. As I recall, these bonds, and now I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty sure that as I recall, because again, my notebooks have been tucked away for a number of years, I know these were 50-year bonds. There's no doubt about that.
They were.
And they were bearer bonds, so
Yeah.
whoever has them can cash them, so to speak. And they were, I believe, the one we were looking at, and now the bonds they had apparently ranged from 1935 to 1949. The ones they said they were in the store of where these bonds were being kept. But the ones they had, I think they specifically brought one dated 1949. Now that would clearly have been after the war, and that would have been bonds that were issued to not only cover the debt and everything for the war, but also, as was my understanding, to cover some of the expense of the rebuilding and the reconstruction after the war. But these bonds, the one that we looked at, I believe it was dated 1949, and it was due to mature in 1999.
Which is when we met with John and Paul.
Yeah. So here we are in October 1999 meeting with them, and we get this information. And of course, I was born in 1949, and our meeting, as I just said, was 1999. And the maturity of the bonds and was this year, as well as my 50th year. I was 50 years old. I then asked John how they came to represent the trust. You know, how did you get to know these guys, and why doesn't the world know about this now? And his explanation, and I'm reading this, was and remains extraordinary, as told by John and Paul. And now I'm going to start off with what I call the Cave Trust story. If you don't mind, I'll do a little bit of reading because this is going to cover it more thoroughly. And I'm hoping, in a way, I'm sort of the Donald Trump approach. I've actually got a teleprompter on my computer that I'm looking at as it sort of scrolls up the page. But I don't want to make this seem as though it's sort of a cold reading. I can't imagine how everybody feels about this, but I want to show as much feeling and animation in this as I can. So bear with us, and I'm asking everyone to, well, Carolyn and Jason, to stop me, ask questions. Let's keep this thing real. And frankly, if anybody out there who's watching can type up some questions, if Jason's keeping an eye on things, and there's some questions coming from you guys, by all means ask them. I'm no historian. I'm just telling you what I know and what I was told, and then I'll show you some documentation to back it up. But I'll start out with, in the mid-1940s, when Japan had already invaded the Chinese mainland and was approaching the Chinese capital city, Chiang Kai-Shek secretly ordered the entire Ming Dynasty treasury crated up and loaded on rail cars. Now, later on, you'll see as we go through this story, we confirmed that by someone else who was completely separate and had nothing to do with these two guys. So we started doing some research, and the guy that we told this to said there's no way you could know that. No way, because he was related directly to the Chiang Kai-Shek family in today's time frame. No way you could know that unless you actually met people who were actually connected to this whole thing. But anyway, I will go over that shortly. But so this thing was crated up, put on rail cars to be sent south into the mountains. Now, everybody knows China is massive, and not unlike what people would understand as Afghanistan, there are caves in these mountains that just go on forever. You can get lost in them. The treasury or the treasure was finally transported, we were told, to an unknown location in the Chinese interior and stored deep inside these secret caves. Chiang sent a contingent of his most loyal soldiers, along with a Christian priest, we're told. And by the way, he was a devout Christian in his later years, and I'm told, and as I read about it, we looked all this stuff up and confirmed it. He was, uh, I think, Catholic originally. I'm not sure he remained with the Catholic religion, but certainly he was devout. And he
I
told
think he was,
these
was he
soldiers.
not Buddhist? I think he was
Well, he was
Buddhist.
originally Buddhist, yeah.
Yeah.
He instructed these soldiers upon pain of death, and to guard the treasury with their lives. Now, it's now the third generation, we were told, of these distinguished guards who today are known as the cave people.
What happens
Now,
with that is that of course they live either in the caves or just outside the caves. They have families, and their children are descendants of these people and are the chosen ones to guard this treasure, this Chiang Kai-Shek treasure, to make sure that it stays safe. So
I'd like to
that's
know what
why
you're thinking right now, Jason. Sorry, dear, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm just listening. You know, you had told me snippets of this story, but I think it's very important that anyone who is privy to your information outside of these shows keeps it very quiet and not talk about it, because I want you to reveal the story.
It's yeah, I was going to say it's out there now, but as I bring it out, yeah, jump in anytime.
Sure.
When I asked why these bonds, when I asked why these bonds were brought to me, because you know, how many times do you look at things like this and go, well, wait a minute, why me? What the heck is going on here? Why us? I was told that the head priest. Now this is where it really gets crazy.
Interesting.
I was told that the head priest, as the original trustee of the Cave Trust, knew that these bonds could only be cashed by the U.S. Treasury. Now, this is where the clandestine stuff starts to come in. As I had an appointment with the president's attorney, because we met with these guys, it was around beginning to the end of October. They knew I had an appointment with the president's attorney within a week or two of that, because I believe we met with Gregory Craig on November the 13th.
Well, it was the president's attorney who contacted Harmon's attorney in Toronto and said, I need to meet with him. We didn't request the meeting with the president's attorney. He requested it with us.
But keep in mind, that was when I'd gotten out on bail.
Yes.
I was putting all my documentation together, and at that point in time, I think the Clintons had decided, wait a minute, this guy can hurt us. We need to get a meeting going. We need to have a talk with him. We need to try to settle this whole thing down. So that was, I believe, well, that plus we were looking for as much help as we could get from my kids. I mean, we were panicked over my kids and thinking that if we could get some help at that level, that would be great. Mm-hmm. So we had an appointment with the president's attorney. These guys then, because they knew that, because we had shared this with them, they wanted me to present the bonds during my appointment with Gregory Craig, to Gregory Craig. Okay.
Sorry, Harmon.
Also
what did these Chinese guys expect you to have Gregory Craig do to cash the bonds?
Well, we wanted them presented to the U.S. Treasury to confirm them. We had no other way of doing that, and we were told by these guys that in the past, when anybody tried to do this, either directly with the Treasury or otherwise, they were killed. They died. Now, keep in mind, let's look at the timeline here. If you recall, when we left Canada, and Daniel Tott went running down with with the Mitsubishi notes with these gold bonds
Him
to the
and his
U.S.
whole
Treasury.
family got killed.
Yeah, 3 days later, he was, well, it said murder suicide, haha. He and his whole family were killed. So again, over the history of this, it's preponderance of this, it's all starting to come together. Okay. John, again, the Chinese guy, also told us that the bonds had deliberate typographical mistakes programmed into them with the printing that only the U.S. Treasury had on record. And so this was so that no one could cash them without the original documents, accompanied by the printing plates and the letter of conveyance from the Treasury.
Which we saw all of them. Which we
They
saw
had them all right there.
letter,
They had all
we
that
saw
right there at the
the
table.
plates, and we saw the original bonds.
So the
That's right.
deliberate typos, that's interesting because just yesterday we were reviewing a document with David Hawkins and Field McConnell, and it was an article from the Washington Post that began with what seemed like an extremely obvious typo. And that just stood out in my mind when you said that. Why were they putting in the typo?
Well, anybody who tried to present them, the Treasury could easily look at it and say, well, look at this. This is misspelled and that's not right. This is obviously a forgery and so we're not going to, you're dealing with forged documents. Therefore, we're going to arrest you and put you in jail. And many of these people were. You can find stories about gold bonds from China and so on. There's so much subterfuge on the internet right now. There's one particular one that we looked up, and I don't know if you can find this one. I could actually give it to you, but it's not difficult to find. Where you can put Chiang Kai-Shek gold bonds in there, and you'll see that someone had tried to present gold bonds from the Chiang Kai-Shek government that are obvious forgeries. I mean, they took the emblem off of a U.S. dollar bill and of George Washington and put it on there. I mean, it was just a cobbled together load of nonsense.
Yeah, it's terrible.
But I wouldn't be a bit surprised if the CIA, in their wisdom, have created these subterfuges so that no one will touch any of this kind of stuff, and I don't blame them, and nor would I, quite frankly. But this is not what we're talking about, guys. I know something that looks genuine and authentic from a professional perspective. Carolyn just looked at it with her mouth open from a personal perspective of somebody who's not even in the industry.
You dealt with the Mitsubishi notes and you had those authenticated. You went to the banks, you saw all of that. You went to, I forget where it was, where you had it authenticated. And
the Bank of International Settlement in Geneva.
Like. Yes, that was it.
Now here again, it continues on to be, Carolyn says, interesting. The elderly high priest, we were told this, the elderly high priest had a spiritual vision. Now, many of us in the Christian world, and especially those of us who come through the Pentecostal and the Charismatic, really do believe in visions. We really do believe in the power of the Holy Spirit. And I think I've told you in past videos that I am baptized in the Holy Spirit. I do pray in tongues or pray in the Spirit. At that time, I was still in that position, and Carolyn as well. So that is part of our religious belief and part of our practice. So this wasn't too terribly unusual to us, especially knowing that this was a Christian high priest or an elderly high priest. But he had a spiritual vision, he said, during his meditation.
And we know that we also know that Chinese people meditate, at least, sir. I want to say gurus, but that's Indian. But I want to say something with China. They meditate for long periods of time. They can go into trances. They can see things that we can't see because of their spiritual enlightenment, if you want to call it.
And we were told by these guys that they've met this man, that he was highly spiritual, that he didn't eat meat, he was a vegetarian, he was in meditation a lot, and he was their leader. He was their high priest. He was their leader.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. But during one of his meditations, he had a vision of the man who would take charge of and complete the cashing of these bonds after maturity. And of course, here we sit 50 years later, the bonds, the ones that we had at least, had matured. The bonds and the other treasures were said to have a curse. This was also conveyed to us, that they had a curse on them. Probably the CIA put the curse on, or CIA put the curse on them.
That was a spiritual curse.
Yeah, that anyone who was not pure of heart and honest in their motives would die. Well, I suppose, I don't know where Daniel Todd and his family came from, but pure of heart or not, they died. We were told that many had, and of course, again, our experience is certain people have died. The high priest described to John and Paul that this would be a man of great integrity. And he told them about my nationality. He detailed my physical appearance, my race, and my birth date and year of and birth date and the year of 1949. John insisted that the trustee was told nothing about me before he gave them the direction to find me in Canada.
Well, John didn't know what your birth date and birth year were. He didn't know any of that. So yeah.
So as we sat there at the table, and we'd known these guys for nearly a year by then, and again spent time with their families and on dinners and outings and things, and so we were all quite friendly.
And business meetings, yes.
And business meetings, oh yeah, lots of business meetings. He said, "Would you mind, respectively, if I see your driver's license to confirm these things?" So I gave him my driver's license. These guys walked away from the table. They talked for a moment, got up. You could see them getting excited. They came back to the table pretty excited, and they said, "This is going to sound strange." They said, "You're it. You're the one." And I said, "Wait a minute. What does that mean?" He described you.
They used the specific words, "You are the key master." Now everybody can laugh and think Ghostbusters.
Rick Moranis.
Matrix also. Matrix.
Yeah.
But
this guy, he said it in Chinese. Yeah, he said it in Chinese. It was, and I've got it in the document here. Wan Jian Dishun.
Yeah, whatever.
And that translated either means the master key or the key master. And I must admit, that was back after the Ghostbusters was out. And Carol and I looked at each other and began to chuckle a little bit. And I mean, these guys didn't even crack a smile.
But why are you the key master, Harmon? What is it about you that you could deal with these instruments that the CIA couldn't? What is it, Carolyn? How is it?
I know. Because I know my husband. I know his heart. I know his integrity. I know his intent. I know what he's been through for the past over 20 years. I know that he loves God, that he listens to God, that he prays, that he meditates. I know who he is as a spiritual person. And you can be all embarrassed, honey, but I have no qualms in saying that I know who you are as a spiritual person. And it's amazing. As a matter of fact, when I first met Harmon, and I will tell this, and I was very intuitive back then, and I'm intuitive now, but the stress has created a bit of a blockage. But I felt that when I met him. When I met him, it was like a spiritual experience, and I knew who he was. I knew that he was a good person. I knew I was going to marry him, and that was it.
I will agree that Harmon's integrity exudes from him. He is.
It does.
Absolutely honest, in my experience.
And he's been told that by many people, by business partners, by people who know him personally. They say they have never met a person as more honest and has more integrity than Harmon.
Now, I have enemies out there, obviously in governments and other places, who will tell you that I'm a dirty, rotten person and I'm a liar and all the other stuff. So we all have a mixed bag sort of circling around us with opinions, for sure. But in any case, these guys actually said that this priest said that I was the only one who could transact these bonds. Okay. So I'm sitting there thinking, well, okay, carry on. I mean, by this time I was more than impressed. I was, again...
And I'm nodding my head going, yes, I understand why.
So John also made it clear that these bonds were purely for the benefit, and this came directly from the priest, for the benefit of the people, and were not to be released under any circumstances when it came time for their release into the hands of the communist Chinese government. And that's not going to make our Chinese friends very happy. The priest was said to be, now this is the other thing that just blew me away. The priest was said to be well over 200 years old.
Come on now.
How could
that be?
I was always, well, I don't know. What they said was he was in meditation all the time. He was, I mean, apparently that's not so unusual for people who meditate all the time and who in India and China and the places where they, the monks and people like that. I don't know. I don't have any experience of that.
200.
Yes. I will tell you that
if you do your research,
as we get through this, you will see something that will blow you away.
If you do your research on Chinese priests, Indian gurus that meditate, that eat a very clean diet, they can live for a very, very, very long time. Just like Indian gurus can hold their breath and almost go into a coma-like state.
Well, I'm certainly not doubting Harmon, but I don't know. We'd have to. I think it could be an exaggeration on the part of the people who shared that information with him. I could believe 100,
I feel the same way.
You'll see as we go on. You'll see as we
go on. Wait till you see what else we've got. and it took 20 years for us to get this new information, which I just, anyway.
We'll keep going.
With respect, as you've just shown me respect, and I showed them respect, and again, I challenge anybody out there to challenge this, please. I agreed to present the bonds to President Clinton's attorney, okay? John told me then that he would be providing the originals. These were the terms, these were the conditions. He would be providing the originals, the bonds that we were inspecting, plus high-resolution color copies of all the accompanying materials. I would be given the originals and copies at the meeting place, which we set up a meeting at a Toronto hotel where Gregory Craig was staying. And that once Craig inspected the originals, he would only be permitted to return to Washington, D.C. with the laser copies. And the agents that were working with John and Paul these were some serious guys. I mean, anyway, the originals would be returned to the agents at the door on the way out of our meeting. Those were the conditions.
Yeah, in other words, we couldn't run out of the meeting and
make copies or whatever.
Make copies or go into our car and take, which we would never do. But they were very, very serious that this needed to be respected, and we certainly agreed with that, and said that the originals would be returned to them right after the meeting.
And now our phones had no cameras or anything in it. And again, these guys were respectable guys, and we with all respect, we wouldn't have done anything that would have been subterfuge in any way. That's just not who we are.
Of course,
but they had to be very careful.
Yes, all of their...
They had to be very careful because all of this was, they were responsible for this, so they had to be very cautious and very careful, and we understood that.
And of course, their high degree of caution speaks to the credibility of the documents. I guess they could have done that if they were forged anyway, but this thing's worth like $1 billion or $6 billion. They don't want somebody like grabbing it and running out the door.
No.
Absolutely. No. And the package that I was given was $100 million worth of bonds at $10 million each, and but no copies would be made. That's right. They didn't leave this stuff with us after the meeting. They took it with them. They presented it back to us at the doorway of the meeting place. They waited for us at the door to get the originals back. It was all a very, very tight schedule and a very strict schedule. And there was no exceptions to that schedule.
Right.
At the meeting, with Gregory Craig in the Toronto hotel, and it was a private dining room. And when we went into the dining room, the door was locked, so we could tell this was going to be a very serious meeting. And he had no idea what we had with us. I mean, we were there to talk about the Mitsubishi deal. We were there to talk about my children and whether or not they could give us any help. I mean,
why did you think
Craig had no idea what else we had with us?
But why did you think that the president's lawyer would care about an individual family case?
Well, why did he ask to have a meeting with us in the first place?
Maybe the billion-dollar bonds.
No, he didn't know about them.
Ah. Well, the CIA
he knew about the
stuff,
Mitsubishi deal. He knew about the Mitsubishi deal. He also knew that I had confirmed that it was real. He also knew that the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, had deemed them fraudulent, and I was there to prove that that wasn't true.
I see.
And he also knew, because he was the president's attorney, my guess is he also knew that the last thing they wanted was these things to be revealed, because this was going to be a covert bank that would last them for years to come, with tens and maybe hundreds of billions of dollars. So I was really a huge fly in their ointment. So that's why he met with me. And I think in my naivety on the one hand, but in my what I felt was leverage, because I think I had some pretty big leverage here. Because my attorney said, don't meet with him, you're liable to be arrested. I said, I'm going to meet with him. When I met with the SEC, he said, don't meet with him, you're going to be arrested. I said, no, I'm not, because I've got the truth. In both instances, I was not only not arrested, well, let me carry on. So I was naive enough to think that Hillary Clinton and her issues for children, you know, she was supposed to be, I'm here for children, that she would actually care about my kids.
No.
Yeah. I just want to say that when Harmon met with Gregory Craig, he had a lot of the Mitsubishi deal information in his briefcase, and Harmon said, I can show you this.
Of it.
And yeah, a box of it, that's right. And Gregory Craig said, I don't need to see it. I know it's real.
No argument. But you need to stop what you're doing, Harmon.
And make peace with your government.
Make peace with your government. That's right. Those were his exact words.
What hotel was it that he met you at, Harmon?
Oh, I can't remember right now. I'd have to go back to my notebook, but it was right in the metropolitan area of Toronto. I'm sure it's in my notebook.
Crown Plaza, I don't know.
I can tell you the date. I can tell you the time. I can tell you everything, but I don't remember the name of the hotel.
I don't remember.
But it was in a private dining room, locked, and I can tell you the guy that came in to wait on us to give us some coffee and stuff was anything but a waiter. He was clumsy. He was obviously an agent of some sort.
Well, I don't know whether he was an agent, but I don't know whether he was an agent or not. Only because they wouldn't let anybody. Yeah, they wouldn't let anybody walk in that room. That's my opinion. Yeah. He was very nervous.
Why would an agent be nervous?
Well, he wouldn't be. I mean, I didn't notice him being all that nervous, dear. But you're right, an agent wouldn't be.
No.
Maybe it's because he knew he was. Maybe he knew it was the president's attorney. I'm not sure, but
he didn't respond.
And this was
to the
November
tweet,
13th,
by the way. So
what's that?
Gregory Craig did not respond to my tweet to him, which
No,
included one of your videos.
Of course not.
And he told one of the investigative reporters here in New Zealand who contacted him that he didn't remember us. Now, when I get done telling you when I get done telling you what I'm going to tell you, imagine him not remembering us.
Yeah. Okay.
Please continue.
But anyway, November 13th, 1999, private dining room. After our discussion of the Mitsubishi note confirmation, of which we've already talked about in previous videos, and of course that was when the famous statement was made: if you carry on with this, you'll never see your children again. And what do you want me to do, Harmon? Get them all fired? And of course my answer was yes. And that's one of our tweets. Hashtags is get them all fired. After the Mitsubishi note confirmation, and after we talked about my kids and whether or not he'd be willing to help and how he could help, and you'll see in some of the emails that I've got online that he actually offered to help and he gave us some advice around the kids. But anyway, we then, imagine this, introduced the Chinese gold bonds to Craig. We more or less pulled the same thing that John and Paul pulled on us. We said, I've got something else for you here. We gave him the story in brief, and we gave
Well,
we
we
gave him
didn't
the.
tell him about you being the key master, but
Oh no, none of that, none of that, none of that. We just pulled them out. We gave him a real
yeah.
brief of the story. We of where we got them, where we thought they were from. He looked at us like, you've got to be kidding me. And this what a waste of my time. But when I guarantee you, when we pulled out the bonds, the envelope, and we pulled the bonds out and we gave them to him to inspect, he turned white.
Yeah.
He was man. Here's what they say in New Zealand, gobsmacked.
Craig was, because he knew that was real.
Where
Yeah.
did you, yeah, where did you get these? So we told him as little as we could get away with, but I said, what's most important, Gregory, is that we would like to get these confirmed by the Treasury. We've been asked by, and at that time then we were told that, tell him it was a Chinese association, okay, that had given them to us as an intermediary, and we were to present them to him, and he was to take them to the president and present them to the Treasury to get them confirmed. The quality and authenticity of these bonds, and I'm telling you, it shocked him as much as it did us. We told him the bonds were from a Chinese association, as I just mentioned. Come back to the text again. After carefully examining the bonds and all the materials, he agreed. Now imagine if he thought they were junk, he wouldn't agree to anything. He agreed to take the bonds, not the bonds, but the laser copies. First of all, he said, "Can I take these with me?" I laughed at it. I said, "You must be joking. There's some guys outside the door that would beg to differ. You wouldn't get 5 feet beyond the door." He said, "Okay, I understand." I said, "But here are the laser copies. These are high-resolution laser copies. You can take these to the President and the U.S. Treasury for authentication." We did not tell him, by the way, about the programmed typo defects in the bonds. And frankly, he sat there and looked at them. He studied them for a few minutes. And you'd think a guy an attorney of his caliber would not only study them and look at them carefully, but when he got them back to his office, I'm talking about the laser copies, the high resolution, he would have studied them some more and wouldn't have presented them to the President or the Treasury if he saw some typos in there that would make him look silly, right?
Well, I just wonder
if he thought they were forged.
What caliber this attorney is. He could be a 22.
Well,
who knows?
The President's attorney? Yeah.
I think if you're going to be the attorney for Bill Clinton, it's more important that you're on board with playing ball than necessarily being a good attorney. Harmon, we've just had some sort of problem with the video connection. We've lost Harmon and Carolyn. Let me see if I can get them back here. It's a fascinating story from Harmon Wilfred about his experience as a CIA asset. Harmon, do I have you back?
Okay, lock the room again, honey.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna lock the room again.
I don't have live video on you though, Harmon. Let me see if I can refresh here. No, we've lost live video. Let me try something else. Fascinating information from Harmon Wilfred and his wife, Carolyn Dare Wilfred. We're using something that is an alternative to Skype because of some difficulties we have had, primarily with security on Skype. Let's see if we can get everybody back here. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I want to remind people, there we go. Are we back?
We are, but the sound is very, very, speak again.
Yeah, almost no volume, Jason.
Okay. I can hear you guys, so perhaps
there's no volume.
No volume. Almost no volume with you.
Boy, I'm really not excited to be troubleshooting live on the air. Let me try one other thing.
I can see your mouth moving, but I'm not understanding you. Okay.
So, yeah, a lot of technical difficulties with that video connection today. We're just going to remind everybody that redbubble.com is having a 20% site-wide sale today. You can pick up loads of good crowdsourced the truth info. Can you hear me now?
With no video and no audio.
No, he was on the wrong server then.
Yeah, not working. That's very disappointing. We try one more thing here. Sorry to be troubleshooting technical issues live on the air, everybody. Doing everything we can to communicate there. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Mm.
You might have to go to Skype.
Camera, microphone.
Although I doubt that it's...
How about now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me? Hello, hello. Refreshing the video connection. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I can. Gotcha. Yes, I've got you.
Okay. See, I don't ever let computers win. All right. Please carry on, Harmon.
Okay, so we're back on. I'm assuming that we were completely cut off a moment ago, so I'll back it up just a little bit.
But we should be mindful of it's 120. Sorry, an hour and 20 minutes already. So
yeah. We're getting towards it. I mean, and if you want to cut it at some point in time and continue it another time, just say so. But I think we're going to leave a lot of people hanging if we do that.
Let's carry on. Let's try and wrap it up in the next 20 minutes.
I'm trying to keep the distractions out of it, and yet get the content done.
Yes.
As I've said before we got cut off.
You left off with we didn't tell him about the program typo.
Yeah, I see that. We didn't tell him about the program typo defects in the bonds, and frankly, none were mentioned after his detailed inspection. He didn't mention it. We followed up by email and fax with him on December the 2nd, and keep in mind this meeting took place on November the 13th. So December 2nd, 1999, and we received a response on January the 12th, 2000. Now, Jason, if you go to the last page of that interview outline, you'll see that there are some links there. Yes. There's a link there for the December 2nd email that we got, that we exchanged, and there's also a link there for the January 12th exchange.
I think we can have people look at that later if you want to keep going.
What I want to say, what I want to say is, you show it.
Yep.
I'll just say what I remember of it rather than me trying to find it and look at it myself. But his response back was that there was some typos, which we expected, a misspelling or two, and there was a reference to the Ministry of Finance, which of course there's never been a Ministry of Finance in the U.S., and that the Treasury he was the attorney for the Treasury. He was that particular phrase is in that email. General Counsel. Not only said that they thought they were quote unquote crude forgeries. Now imagine the word crude coming into this thing after we've just described what we described to you. They were anything but crude. But he was pretty keen on wanting to know where he got them. And Gregory then said through a Chinese association, through an intermediary, blah, 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 blah. And then they dropped it.
What do you mean?
I can't imagine these guys dropping it when somebody's out there trying to authenticate bonds of that magnitude, and then they've declared them fraud, and then they just leave it be and go away.
Why wouldn't they prosecute the fraud, you mean?
Yeah.
That's right.
But as I said in here, they found grammatical typos and mistakes. There was no numerical mistakes. Described as a crude forgery. These documents were anything but crude, I'm just reading. And as to the program mistakes, this was expected, of course. Craig committed to return the laser copies, which he never did. Obviously, he didn't want us to have them back. And he commented that the General Counsel for the Treasury wanted to know where they came from. He reportedly told them a Chinese association in Canada through an intermediary. That was the end of it. The general consensus from John and Paul was that the bonds had been confirmed. They expected to get that sort of response. We agreed that there is no way the Treasury Department would not have investigated the matter and pursued the holder of these bonds for attempting to transact million-dollar fraudulent U.S. gold bonds. We believe, this is my belief, that the Clintons were determined to pursue the location of these bonds in league with the People's Republic of China, who had been in this same pursuit for decades, according to John and Paul. As I literally I had become a hot potato, if you want to call me that, where the Mitsubishi deal was concerned. Not even the Securities and Exchange Commission was allowed to touch or prosecute me. They ran from me. So attempting to locate these bonds through me just didn't seem to be an option. Now, I'm speculating a bit on that.
Why
but
were
I think
they
I'm probably
disallowed
right.
from prosecuting you?
On me? Because if they touch me and I end up in court, now they could kill me, I suppose, but that was beginning to get a little titchy. But if they tried to prosecute me and got me in court, I'm a blabbermouth. I'm not going to sit there in court and not tell them everything. I'm going to tell them everything.
And Harmon had the evidence.
I had all the documented evidence. The last thing they wanted to see was me or any of my documented evidence in the quote light of day, no pun intended. That's exactly what I've had on much of it on my website now for the last 12 years. But again, if you touch it, you give it life, and so far no one's touched it, and everybody keeps insisting that it's nonsense. But you
Jason
and I both know.
touched it. Art Voice has touched it.
I know. So it's starting to be touched now, and it's starting to be not nonsense. Now, John and Paul had also told us, and we checked this out, that the Clintons had already started an investigation on the location of these bonds in collaboration with the Chinese government during their presidential trip to China in June of 1998. Now, I did some checking, and sure enough, they had made a trip to China, and they'd even gone into the countryside in China then. The object of the U.S. government, and we were told this, and that makes sense to me, was to locate and destroy these bonds as null and void. The justification was, and it's a reasonable justification, that they were originally issued to the Chinese nationalist government, which was ousted and replaced in 1950 by the People's Republic of China. This was in spite of the fact that these were bearer bonds and anyone in possession could cash them. So there was a legal argument, well, that government doesn't exist anymore, therefore the debt has gone away. Now imagine if that debt became recognized, which is why I wanted to have this private conversation with Trump. If that debt were recognized, or even speculatively recognized, and it's not on the books of the U.S. today, and it was in the billions and billions of dollars back then, the amount of the gold has gone up, the interest rate on those bonds, and the fact that they've now matured at 50 years, that was 20 years ago, how much are they worth? How much are they worth?
Pay off the national debt.
Well,
yeah.
Unfortunately, they are the national debt.
Yeah, that's right.
If you think about it.
So it's,
you know,
so it's U.S.
if the U.S.
bonds
is broke today,
that...
how broke are they with these bonds on their record if they're already broke today?
So wait a minute. So these are, the United States puts out bonds. Somebody in China buys the bonds, essentially giving a loan to the U.S. government. 50 years later, the bonds mature, the U.S. government has to pay back the loan. Is that essentially correct?
Well, that's right. In other words,
gold.
They gave gold to the U.S. government, massive amounts of it.
And so the U.S. government has an interest in saying that Chinese government is out of business, we're not paying the bonds.
That's right.
That's right.
But they're bearer bonds.
They're bearer bonds signed by the U.S. Treasury. Look, the evidence of the authenticity. So, my opinion, and it doesn't obviously carry much water, is that they look good to me. And we were also told that John and Paul were aware that on the QT, very quietly, the U.S. Treasury actually had a system set up so that somebody who had all of the authentication actually came to them, that they could actually deal with them quietly to try to rid themselves of these bonds.
Deal with them in the same way they dealt with the Todd family.
That's right.
Yeah,
yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, anyway, now we're going to bring this up to as current time as we can. In March of 2001, now if you recall, after we left this meeting with Craig, wasn't long after that I went back down to the U.S., was put in federal prison, managed to get myself out, come back to Canada. Ultimately, we were secreted out of. Well, let me just carry on with the story. Carolyn and I left Ontario in fear of our lives in March 2001 and traveled across Canada to Vancouver Island, BC, to await further instruction. John and Paul were informed of this and maintained contact with us the whole time.
Yeah.
And maintained contact with our, and I'm going to call it friendly, CIA contacts. We did have a couple of people in the CIA who were still friendly, but we didn't know how much we could trust. While we were hidden away in Vancouver, and it was in Vancouver Island, Victoria, in June 2001, John told us that we must leave Canada for Hong Kong and made arrangements for our departure. On June the 30th, we departed Canada, and John's operatives met us in Hong Kong and gave us assistance for a period of 6 weeks. We were then instructed that Hong Kong was no longer safe and departed there for our arrival in New Zealand on August the 11th, 2000. No, it was, I'm sorry, that date's wrong, August 11th, 2001.
Harmon, briefly, a question from the comments. Does the Federal Reserve have anything to do with these bonds?
I don't know. I know the Federal Reserve is completely separate and distinct from the government, but I can't imagine that they wouldn't, only because they're the ones who control the currency.
Right, but you're dealing with the Treasury, so...
But keeping in mind, though, Jason, and this is something I think we can have another session about, is that these bonds were backed by gold, and even the dollar bill, the U.S. dollar bill, they were all gold certificates until what, 1974?
1973.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, once in New Zealand, Carolyn received part of her inheritance, and we made a significant donation to the Cave Trust through John's Hong Kong bank. This was done by Carolyn as a much-needed charitable donation for food and medicine for the Cave Guardians. Now, again, were we being scammed? We really didn't believe that we were, based on everything we had. So,
well, we had known John and Paul for quite some time.
It was probably upwards of 2 years by then.
We prayed about it, we discussed it, and we decided that this was something that we should do. These people were starving, needed medicine, and we just felt that this was a good thing to do.
So it was poor, starving people living in caves that were the guardians of these billion-dollar gold bonds.
Yes, that's what's so bizarre about it. They could not get it out of there. They could not get it out of there for fear of it being exposed. And if they did get it out of there, they had to do it in such a way that it wouldn't be exposed, because my sense was they were there inside mainland China somewhere.
Harmon, are you aware of this article from the Los Angeles Times? It was published in October of 2010, saying in China, millions make themselves at home in caves. I don't know. Actually, sorry, this looks like it's March 18th, 2012.
Yeah.
Is that the same people we're talking about?
Don't know.
Well, I can tell you that we have some Chinese friends here in Christchurch who, for family, I think it's Guangdong province, I forget what the province is, actually do live in caves. I mean, that's where their homes are. So people there are pretty used to the idea of living in caves.
Wow.
Anyway, John and Paul delivered the donation, and then they came to New Zealand for a visit. Now, if they were scamming us, it was a pretty interesting scam. In February 2002, to provide us a special gift from the cave people, as well as a handwritten letter of thanks from the high priest and trustee of the Cave Trust. So we have an original handwritten letter of thanks in Chinese from the Cave trustee.
From a 200-year-old dude.
Well, now, hang on.
Now, I just want to interject. I just want to interject for a minute and ask everyone to be patient with us. We need to finish telling this story. I know we're going over time, but for safety reasons, we have to finish telling this story today.
It won't take me long.
Cannot stop.
Yes. No. Keep going.
It won't take me long. Won't take me long. We're getting towards the end of it. While staying with us in New Zealand, John presented us this again with photos of the cave people. He had some. What do you call those kind, dear?
Polaroids.
Well, he had some Polaroids, but he also had some digital stuff on a CD. And I say, great astonishment, pictures of the interior of the caves where the vast treasure is kept. Photos, and I kid you not. We went up to our computer, he stuffed that CD in there, and he started showing it. He said, I can't give you a copy of the CD. Don't even ask me. You can't print any of this. I've got to take it with me. But because you guys have been so generous, we want you to see this, and we want you to know that we'd like to continue to work with you. The photos included John and Paul displaying open wooden crates filled with gold and silver jewelry, plates, inlaid plates, armor, again, inlaid armor, shields, and other weapons, as well as incredibly beautiful antique-looking goblets and other sort of items, and I can't just name them all, laden with diamonds and other diamonds, jade, rubies, emeralds, and other precious stones.
It was like looking at a picture of Aladdin's cave.
Yeah. I was, again, these guys, individual, and then they showed us a display, and keep in mind, he's either got himself, but either taking the pictures, or Paul is taking the pictures, and they're standing there, going da-da, showing the thing, so they're in the picture. Individual, we went to these tables, these wooden tables, individual jewels as large as eggs and bigger were also on display. And as Carolyn says, truly an Aladdin's Chiang Kai-Shek treasure cave. Mm-hmm. John and Paul also took photos of each other standing next to stacks and stacks and stacks of gold bars that were about 2 meters high that extended into the depths of the cave. As far as you could see, as far as the lighting would hold out. The lighting was bare bulbs on about a 3-meter high ceiling, connected by a single wire extended from light to light. It's absolutely, and I say it in here, breathtaking. Of course, John would not allow us, as I said, to take copies or prints of the photos, so we have only each other's testimony of what we witnessed. And thank God Carolyn is my wife and she's with me, and we've got some credibility, because I can tell you we both saw this stuff.
Well, more credibility is coming up, so just wait and see.
It's not done yet. It was agreed by John and Paul and the trustee that another attempt would be made, and we didn't know, how long it would take. Another attempt would be made to transact the gold bonds when my challenges with the U.S. government had passed, no matter how long it took. The elderly priest, or the trustee, continued to insist that I was the only person who could do this. It's now been 19 years, guys. Now, I'm going to get to the end of this now. Not long ago, I dug out a file. As you know, I have all my files stored here on all the stuff that I've got in all my notebooks. And I dug out a file. It's been
they're not there. They're not there anymore.
No. Well, it was more than 6 months back now. It was probably 7 or 8 months ago. I dug out my files on this stuff, and I was just curious. I pulled out the Cave Trust file, and in going through all of my historical records, I came across that file, which contained my notebook and all of the correspondence with John and Paul, including copies of their passports. See, being the skeptical fellow that I am, when these guys started describing to me who they were and what they were doing and who they represented, I said, all right, I want copies of your passports, and I want police reports on both of you. Wouldn't you ask for that? I wanted to see what they would do. Instantly, they produced their passports, and they went out and got police reports and gave them to me. So I have, in these documents, I've blacked out their faces, and I've blacked out their names. Carolyn said, gosh, Harmon, why did you bother? I just wanted you to know that I've got them. So a lot of this stuff is redacted. Including copies of their passports and police reports, originally required by me for credibility. In looking at that stuff, as well as the original handwritten letter of thanks and the translation of that letter from the cave trustee. And again, those are redacted so that you don't know what the trustee's name is, and it's also got John and Paul's names redacted. That's there as one of those links that you've got. Since then, and I started doing some research, but I've been unable to find John or Paul. They lived in Toronto at the time, and I must admit I haven't gone to a huge link because going to an expense right now, we don't have much money. So I thought, well, it's not that important. I'll just leave it. As a New Zealand friend of mine had recently informed me that he had investor banking, had an associate who was pretty high up in the investment in the banking industry in Asia and even in Taiwan and China, I decided to approach him to determine if he knew anybody who was close to the original Chiang Kai-Shek family or any of their relatives that were living today. He said his contact actually had a direct line inside the Chiang family and may be willing to talk to me, to assist me.
And we were shocked. I mean, it with Harmon's story that goes on, it's like one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. It's like, and it's not like we try to make it happen like that. It just happens like that.
That's right. I didn't have to push the envelope at all.
No.
No pun intended. No pun intended. And my friend, and again, all these people need to remain anonymous, and I'll call him Robert, made contact with his investor Asian banking friend, whom at this point I will call Mr. Lee. It seems like Mr. Lee gets thrown around a lot in China, especially in Hong Kong, so I'll call him Mr. Lee. And we arranged a Skype conference call. I confidentially forwarded him a scanned copy of the Cave trustee's handwritten thank you note and copies of John and Paul's passports and Canadian police reports. Our Skype conference took place in November 2017, 6 months ago. Mr. Lee listened attentively, and I had a couple of my friends there with him. Robert was there with him, plus another friend. As I gave him an account of my Chiang Kai-Shek U.S. gold bond, that's what you could call it, encounter, including the meeting with John and Paul, their account of the history and the origin of the bonds, and my meeting with Gregory Craig. And I must admit, this guy was just sitting there stoically listening carefully. When I completed my account of our meeting in New Zealand, with a description of this Skype meeting, the description of the photos inside the cave, Mr. Lee became quite animated. Because what I described to him was that these things, these jewels and all this treasury were in giant wooden crates. And I described to him what the stuff looked like and how these crates were put together. And these guys were lifting the lids of the crates and taking photos down inside the crates and so on. And of course, I described to him how all this happened and how this stuff ended up there as a result of being chased out of the country by the Japanese and so on. He told us, he stopped and he said, enough. He told us that no one outside the Chiang family could possibly have this information unless their story was genuine. Mr. Lee also told us that
especially a white guy from Canada or from the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, that's right. Mr. Lee also told us that the real proof, now this was the shocking part. You ready for this, Jason? The real proof of our connection was the thank you letter. It wasn't the content of the letter, because the content was a very pleasant, thank you very much, Carolyn, for contributing this money to us for food and so on and so on. You're very kind. We can't thank you enough. All the typical things you'd expect to see in a thank you letter. It wasn't the content of the letter. He said, to his shock, it was written in a dialect and a script from a previous century.
So said, that's the evidence that the guy is super old.
He said, Harmon, this is the connection. He left you this for a purpose, so that if you ever brought this out, that to someone like me, we would instantly know that what you're telling us is the truth.
Crowdsource the Chinese truth.
Yep. and he said this is more than, and he saw it was signed by the Cave Trust and the Cave trustee, and he said more than likely this trust, and he could see the markings on it, was created in Hong Kong. This guy could be in Hong Kong, or at least he's connected to some sort of a Hong Kong organization. But he said he was going to do what he could to find him. And he also had the information, of course, on John and Paul with their police reports and everything.
And we thought, I mean, before he said that, we just thought it was a nice thank you note. I mean, who knows how to read Chinese? Who knows how to look at Chinese writing and know it's, an ancient writing from over a century ago? Who knows that?
I mean, it was in a ancient dialect, written in an ancient script.
Yeah.
He felt that this was given to me, and again, I'm looking at my script here, speaking of script, by the cave trustee to authenticate his identity and the existence of the cave trust. We could never have known this. Never. We thought it was just a nice thank you note. Mr. Lee was more than satisfied with my account and committed to a meeting with the Chang family to share my account and see what could be done. Now, the obvious question from us is, are you saying that the Chang family have no idea where or how to find the location of the treasury? And he said, yes. Yeah. Chang told no one, even his own family. And to this day,
obviously he didn't trust his own family and their greed or whatever.
Up to that date, which was over 6 months ago, this guy, Mr. Lee, told us the treasury had not been found even by the People's Republic of China or their Clinton CIA collaborators. Mr. Lee also agreed with John and Paul and the trustee that the treasure must never fall into the hands of the People's Republic of China, but to remain for the benefit of the people of Taiwan and China, if at all possible. After waiting 6 months to hear from this fellow, because I was told by the guys that were there with him, he was so excited when they took him to the airport, he got my name, all my contact information. He wouldn't give any of his. And that he would contact me as soon as he got anything on it. I have heard nothing from Mr. Lee. He's gone away.
And that was 6 months ago, you said?
Yes.
Six months ago. So that's what's prompted us to finally just tell the story in as confidential way as we could in terms of revealing any names. But he's gone away.
Harmon, when did you have this letter translated from Chinese to English, and who did that?
They brought the translation with them when they came to visit us in 2002.
They had the original letter and the translation.
And the translation, yes. That's right. We think that Mr. Lee has gone away to find the cave and the he may have, well, speculation. He's either gone away to find the cave and transact the bonds themselves, or it may be, the same old story of greed, maybe, or this amazing fortune just really does need to benefit what we believe, Carol and I believe, all of humanity, because there may well be enough in here. When you think about it, there may be trillions of dollars in gold. Now, I'm going to just, as we end this, and I think it's time to end it, my feeling is this. We're talking about gold bonds where gold has to back up the bonds, right?
Yeah.
That they're holding. And by the way, the photographs that they showed us in these places wasn't just the treasury itself. They had pallets. I'm talking about, you have to use a forklift truck. Pallets and pallets of gold bonds. Boxes of gold bonds.
And bars of gold.
Well, but I'm talking about pallets of gold bonds. They had massive amounts of gold bonds in there. And literally, John and Paul were lifting up the lids of some of these boxes to show us there was the same kind of envelopes that they showed us. They opened the envelopes to show us the bonds, in these photographs. So they've got pallets of these bonds. How many is anybody's guess? But my feeling is this. We may be a world nowadays who are based on debt. All the wealth in the world is still sitting there, the gold and the silver and all the rest of the stuff to back it all up. But it's based on the word of a country, and it's all based on debt. It's not backed by anything nowadays. Wouldn't it be nice if we could get back to some sort of a standard again, so that people can't just continue to con us? Governments can't
money when they need it.
create money out of nothing.
Yeah.
Make themselves rich out of transacting money on top of money on top of money with all these monetary transactions that make nothing and build nothing. Wouldn't it be nice to get back to some sort of a standard? And if that's true, is it possible that the riches that are tucked away in these caves could actually be used to create a new standard for the global economic system?
Well, and I'm sure
that's a stretch, I know, but it's logical.
I'm sure there are riches like that tucked away all over the world that are actually, physical riches, not just a piece of paper.
Well, keeping in mind now the next interview that we're going to do, I'm going to talk about Wilfred versus the Rothschilds. because that then leads me into the next story, which is going to blow your mind, Jason.
Well, it's already, how many times can it be blown?
I'm going to blow it up again. Because
Harmon,
all of this follows. It just follows to the next, to the next, to the next.
Yeah.
It all makes sense. There's documentation to show, and there is the preponderance of evidence to show.
yes. So you think that Mr. Lee has taken the information that you've given him and gone to try to cash these bonds himself or something?
Honey, somebody's trying to get into this thing. You didn't lock it.
that
I've got somebody for another guest.
Oh, I'm going to lock it. Hang on a minute.
But who is this?
But who's the guest? Somebody's trying to get in.
I can't. It could be King James, because he's been with me on this before. Hang on a minute. Let me just.
Can you see who the guest is?
Okay,
It's supposed to tell me. Anyway, I just locked it, so carry on.
No, but now we've got an audio problem here. How's that? Can you hear me? Can't hear me.
Oh, can't hear you.
I don't know, that might have just been an error here on the... We can't remove one person from there, huh? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
The guest has screwed it up.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up.
Can I get rid of him?
I just wanted to leave you guys with the information.
You'd have to unlock and get rid of him.
Okay.
I'm going to reload.
Okay, so we may return to Skype. It's very difficult to get these video conference applications working properly. I was going to inform Harmon.
I just lost Jason.
I'm back.
Yeah. No, that's the guest. I don't know who the guest is. Can you get rid of him?
Remove. Yep.
Okay. Not sure what's going on there. There was recently a bill that I'd been speaking with David Hawkins about.
Gotcha, Jason. You're back.
Okay, great. What I was
we just got rid of the unwanted guest.
Unfortunately, I'd forgotten to lock it when we came back on again.
Don't worry about that. It might have just been a technical glitch. It's no problem. I wanted to bring to everyone's attention that Forbes had a story just last week or so that after 34 years, we again have a bill to relink the dollar to gold. And David Hawkins and I were looking at this. The value of the dollar was linked to gold between 1789 and 1971. So it was 1971 that Nixon took us off the gold standard, and then in 1973, with the help of Mr. What's his name there, the fat guy who's all about the Council on Foreign Relations, Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, he made a deal with the Royal House of Saud to create a unit called the petrodollar, which linked the value of the dollar to the demand for oil rather than gold. And it is my belief that this was a complex plan that possibly began around the time, or maybe earlier, but I think the assassination of John F. Kennedy may have been related to this plan to link the dollar to oil. John F. Kennedy wanted to eliminate the oil depletion allowance, which was a tax benefit given to oil producers that would have cost these oil producers millions of dollars. John Kennedy also wanted to issue Treasury silver certificates to circumvent the Federal Reserve, and all of this seemed to be not compatible with the plans of those that wanted to link the value of the U.S. economic system to oil and to wage war in the Middle East in what now is a 17-year, 16-year, trillions of dollars. It's just perpetuating this ridiculous Ponzi scheme that is the petrodollar. Now, we're approaching 2 hours. We're in Charles Ortel territory here, Harmon. Is there anything else that you wanted to share?
Sorry.
Well, I'll throw you a hint. I'm glad you brought up what you just did. I'll throw you a hint for the next interview.
Yes.
There's a much bigger plan than that, than what you just described, to back a global currency.
I see. Very interesting as always, Harmon and Carolyn. I want to thank you both for joining me tonight. I want to remind everyone that Crowdsource the Truth is community sponsored, and if you want to help us defend against the persistent losers that are constantly trying to prevent us from assisting Harmon and Carolyn in bringing out their evidence, please become a sponsor of the channel. You can do that on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. You can also make a one-time sponsorship payment with paypal.me/crowdsourcethetruth. And today until midnight, redbubble.com, which is the website that we offer merchandise through, is having a 20% off sale. So if you'd like to purchase some Crowdsource the Truth items, you can do that on redbubble.com. A bunch of handsome t-shirts and mugs. I don't know that we have any America's First Refugee items there yet. We could add some of those. But of course, you can, we were talking about Iran-contra, and there's all kinds of great items that you can pick up. If anything is pictured on a t-shirt or a mug, you can get it on any of these items. Mugs, t-shirts, all of the artwork is available on all of the different items. And of course, everyone is enjoying Quinn Michaels' comical hashtag, the time phone hack. You can enjoy your hot cup of cold Pfeffi from a Hack to the Future mug, and support Crowdsource the Truth while you do it. I want to thank Harmon and Carolyn for joining me. I want to wish Carolyn the best of luck in her shareholder oppression case. We all certainly hope that you prevail in that, so that you and Harmon can carry on your fight against individuals like Gregory Craig, who are obviously trying to suppress the truth, and they don't want anything to do with these bearer bonds, except why don't you give them to me and I'll take care of them for you. And with that, we'll see Harmon and Carolyn next week. I'll see everybody tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in. It's an amazing story.
You,
have a great night.
Thanks.
Good day. Bye.